This is not the end. It's the beginning.
I watched my only son die on a Saturday morning, right there in the middle of a noisy Makati intersection, crushed between a jeepney and a delivery truck. His body was broken, his lips turned blue, and the monitor in the hospital screamed a flatline for 43 minutes. 43 minutes. Do you know what that feels like for a father? It feels like time itself mocking you, while heaven stays silent. And yet, even silence has a voice. Sometimes, it's not the end. It's the terrifying beginning of something holy. My name is Antonio Reyes. I'm a paramedic based in Manila. 17 years in the emergency services, saving strangers, stabilizing trauma patients, praying under my breath, even when I wasn't sure anyone was listening. I've seen bodies crushed by floods, watched mothers bleed in childbirth, and held lifeless children in the back of ambulances. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I had to press my hands against the chest of my own son, begging his heart to beat again. His name is Matthew, 14 years old. He was the light of our family. That morning, he was just excited to attend his best friend Joshua's birthday party. We teased each other in the car. I said his hair looked like Pastor Jerry's after worship. He laughed like he always did, innocent, joyful, full of life. We never made it to the party. It happened at 10:22 a.m. along Ayala Avenue. We were stopped at a red light. I remember adjusting the aircon, and then a truck. I didn't even hear it, just the sudden impact, the screech, the metal bending, glass exploding into my eyes. My chest slammed into the steering wheel. Everything slowed, then everything vanished. When I came to, my left arm was numb, the horn was blaring, but all I could see was Matthew. His head was slumped, blood ran down his forehead, his arms dangled lifeless. I screamed his name. No response. I checked for a pulse. There was nothing. Just silence. I used my one good arm to start compressions, right there in the wreckage. In Jesus' name. Kamban, I shouted over and over. Other drivers started gathering. Someone called 911, but deep down I knew time was slipping through my fingers like sand. At the hospital St. Luke's in Quezon City, they rushed him in. I knew the staff. These were my people. I watched them fight for him like warriors. CPR, epinephrine, defibrillator. Shock. Nothing. Again. Still flat. The lead ER doctor finally looked at me, voice trembling. Sir, we've done everything we can. My wife Liza arrived at that exact moment. She collapsed to the floor screaming. I held her, or maybe she held me, as the monitor stayed lifeless, as they told us to say our goodbyes. And yet, something happened at 11:05 a.m., 43 minutes after his heart had stopped. The monitor beeped. Once, then again, then again. His chest rose. His fingers twitched. The nurses froze. I couldn't believe it. My knees gave out. The doctor thought it was a machine error, but it wasn't. Matthew opened his eyes slowly and whispered, Papa. I wept, but then his next words shook me to the core. Jesus showed me what's coming. We don't have much time. This isn't a story about miracles, friend. It's not about how long the brain can survive without oxygen or the wonders of modern medicine. This is a story about Jesus, about what he revealed to a 14-year-old Filipino boy, and why we must prepare now for what's ahead. My son came back with memories, not of pain, not of the crash, but of a place full of light, peace, and the voice of someone so holy it made all other voices fade away. He told me Jesus met him there and showed him a calendar of the future. He said Jesus pointed to 2025 and warned him that it would be the year where everything changes, not just for the Philippines, but for the entire world. Month by month, vision by vision, Jesus showed him what's coming. Floods, food crisis, economic collapse, deception inside the church itself, and worst of all, a test so severe it would divide those who truly know Jesus from those who only know his name. Matthew's voice was different when he told us, older, steadier, like he'd aged in those 43 minutes beyond the grave. And as he described each vision, I began to realize this was no coincidence. This was a calling. He wasn't just saved, he was sent. And I was chosen to listen. But before I take you deeper into what Jesus revealed to my son, there's something you need to hear. The first words that Jesus spoke to Matthew when he appeared in that light. He said,
I am coming like a whisper to those who listen, and a storm to those who don't. Warn them, the time is short.
So now I'm warning you, not because I'm brave, not because I'm worthy, but because if I stay silent, I'd be denying the one who brought my son back from death, not just to live, but to speak. This isn't just a testimony, it's a trumpet. And if you're reading this, then maybe, just maybe, Jesus wants you to hear it before the shaking begins. Are you ready? Because what Matthew saw, what Jesus said, will turn your world upside down. They kept him for observation. The hospital didn't have a protocol for came back after 43 minutes. The neurologist said it was impossible, even if a pulse returns after that long. He said there should be brain damage, loss of motor function, maybe even permanent coma. But Matthew was speaking clearly within minutes. His eyes tracked perfectly. His grip was strong. No slurred speech, no confusion. And what's more, he didn't seem afraid. He seemed ready. The doctors ran MRI scans, brain activity normal, heart function stable, no internal bleeding. The nurses were whispering outside the room, calling it a miracle. One technician made the sign of the cross as he passed our door. And I just sat there holding my son's hand, listening to him speak words that didn't sound like they were coming from a teenager, but from a prophet. Papa, he said softly, eyes never leaving mine. Jesus didn't just save me, he showed me what's coming. I swallowed hard. You mean he told you about the accident? Matthew shook his head. No, about the world, about this year, about 2025. He sat up straighter as if something inside him told him it was time. Jesus told me the shaking has already begun, but what's coming will shake even the believers if they're not truly listening. He took a deep breath and started to recount what he saw. It was after I left my body, he said I could still see the crash. I saw you calling my name. I saw Mom running down the hallway of the ER crying. But I wasn't scared. I felt like I was being lifted upward, like I was being drawn toward light, but not just any light. It was alive. It was love itself. He paused for a long time, then whispered, "That's where I met him." I didn't have to ask who. I already knew. He didn't look like the pictures in Sunday school. Matthew continued. He was brighter than anything I've seen. His eyes, they looked into me, like he knew everything about me and still loved me fully. His presence felt like I could finally breathe again. Then Matthew's voice changed. It deepened just slightly, like he was recalling something that burned into his soul. Jesus showed me a calendar, he said, but not like ours. It wasn't paper. It was glowing, living. Each month pulsed with a color, some calm, some flashing like alarms. He pointed to 2025 and he said,
This will be the year of the great divide. What has been hidden will be revealed. What is shaken will be broken. And what remains will be mine.
Matthew looked at me, his face so serious it made me shiver. He said, Many people won't see it coming. They'll be busy with school careers, vacations, and suddenly it will begin. It won't look like the end at first. It'll look normal. But underneath, it's like pressure building inside the earth, ready to explode. He paused and looked out the hospital window. Jesus said, the shaking will be physical, political, and spiritual, all at once, and people will scramble for answers. But the only safe place is knowing his voice. I stared at him, unable to speak. A part of me wanted to believe he was just dreaming, but deep down I knew. This wasn't imagination. This was something sacred. Jesus showed me floods. Papa Matthew continued, not just from rain, but from beneath. He said, underground water systems will fail. Cities that never flood will drown. People will blame governments. But Jesus said, it's a shaking from heaven. Then came the moment that sealed it for me. Matthew reached for my hand again, squeezed it tight, and whispered, He told me to tell you, Papa. I blinked. Tell me what? That you've saved so many lives, but now it's time to save souls. I couldn't hold it in. I broke down. Right there beside his hospital bed, I sobbed like a child. Because how could he know I had wrestled with faith for years? I stopped praying except in emergencies. I went to church but didn't listen. And yet, Jesus still spoke through my son to reach me, and he wasn't finished. Matthew said Jesus showed him two types of people during the shaking. One group was prepared not because they had bunkers or money, but because they knew how to listen to him. The other group was panicked, frozen, looking to the news, to the internet, to influencers, to anything but God. And it cost them everything. Jesus said, He's warning now, because of His mercy. Matthew whispered, not to scare people, but to prepare them. He paused again, then added,
Those who walk with me now will stand with me then. Those who ignore my voice will not hear it when they need it most.
For the next few hours, we just listened. Liza sat quietly at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her face. Matthew told us he saw May glowing red like blood, August pulsing orange like a siren, September shimmering with illusions. But those weren't just natural events. They were spiritual tests, each one designed to reveal what's real. He said many churches will fall into fear. Some will preach comfort instead of truth. Others will chase signs and wonders that don't come from God. And Jesus told him that even Christians, yes, even pastors, could be deceived if they don't truly know his voice. The shaking was already starting, but it was mercy, disguised as warning. My son should have been dead, and yet he was sitting in front of me, speaking words of fire and light. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew this wasn't just my son anymore. He was carrying a message from heaven, and everything he was about to share would change our lives forever. Matthew told us that after he felt his spirit leave his body, he floated upward above the hospital lights, above the noise, the machines, the weeping, until all of it faded into silence. But it wasn't dark. He said it was the brightest place he had ever seen, yet it didn't hurt his eyes. It wasn't just light, it was living. It wrapped around him like peace, like love that knew every part of him and still held him completely. He was standing in what he called a place between not quite heaven, but not earth. Everything was glowing and still. He didn't feel afraid, he felt known. That's when he saw him. He didn't walk in, he didn't descend from clouds. One moment, Matthew was alone. The next, he was there. Jesus. Matthew's voice softened when he said his name, as if just speaking it made the air around us holy. Papa, he said, eyes wide with memory. He didn't look like a picture from church, not like in the paintings or the movies. He was real. So real, I felt like everything else I've ever seen was just a shadow. He said Jesus stood in front of him, clothed in radiant light, not shining like the sun, but like eternity. His eyes, Matthew said, were both gentle and full of fire, like oceans that knew every sorrow yet remained strong enough to carry them all. And his voice,
Matthew, do not be afraid. I am with you. I have something to show you.
at that moment, Matthew said, the light around them shifted. The glowing space turned into a kind of vast horizon, and floating in front of them was what looked a little like a calendar. Not paper, not digital, but alive each month, radiating a different color. Some shimmered like gold, others pulsed like red alarms. Some flickered as if fading. It was beautiful and terrifying. Jesus told me, Matthew said that this calendar was for the year 2025, and each month would carry something that would shake the world. He paused, then added, not everything was disaster, but everything was a test. He began to describe what Jesus showed him month by month. And as he spoke, Liza covered her mouth. I sat still, barely breathing. January, Matthew said, was quiet. It glowed light blue. Jesus said it would feel like peace, but it would be the silence before the shaking. Many would mistake it for safety and fall asleep spiritually. February was darker. Storm clouds gathered over nations. Rumors of war. Division would increase, not just between countries, but in churches, in families. March. Jesus showed me a tearing, like a curtain being ripped. Things hidden for years would be exposed. Leaders, systems, secrets. Some people would rejoice in justice. Others would be angry and confused. April pulsed with yellow light. There was pressure in the ground, literal shaking. Jesus showed me parts of the earth moving, fault lines responding to a shift in the spiritual realm. But then he got to May. May was red, Matthew said, flashing like a heartbeat. Jesus showed me food supplies being poisoned, not just shortages, contamination, people getting sick from things they trusted, supermarkets turning into battlegrounds. Not just in one country, everywhere. Liza gasped softly. I could see her fingers tightening around the bed sheet. He said people will panic, but not all. Some will hear his voice and avoid the worst, but only those who've been practicing listening will know what to do. Then came June. June was gray, Matthew said, flickering like static, confusion. People won't know who to trust anymore. Experts, pastors, leaders, they'll all say different things. Fake prophets will rise. Some will use Jesus' name, but they won't carry his heart. Matthew closed his eyes as if reliving what he saw. July was blue-black. Jesus said, that's when fear will grip cities. Something will happen globally. A moment of shock, like 9/11, but not just in one place. Hearts will fail because of fear. Then came August. Matthew's voice dropped. August was orange, like fire. I saw water flooding places that never flood. Cities swallowed, mountains crumbling. But worse, I saw banks closing, cards not working, ATMs empty. Jesus called it the unraveling.
Many trust in their money more than me. When the systems fail, they will see where their hope really lives.
September. Matthew continued was gold, but twisted. I saw miracles, healing, fire from the sky, people shouting revival. But Jesus said it was false, a deception so deep that even pastors would be fooled if they weren't anchored in him.
Not every voice that says, Lord, is mine. Not every miracle comes from my spirit. Tell them to test every spirit or be swept away.
October through December. Matthew said was like watching a movie where everything falls apart. Natural disasters, lights going out, nations at war. But none of it was the real test. He looked at me, eyes glistening. Jesus said the true test is who people become when everything they trusted disappears. Silence filled the room. I looked at my son, just 14, but speaking with a weight I hadn't heard from grown men. I thought about our savings account, our pantry full of supplies, our generator, our plans, and I realized none of that would matter if I didn't know how to hear Jesus when the lights went out. Matthew wasn't done. He leaned forward and whispered,
Tell them, I am still speaking, but so few are listening. Tell them to come back to me while there's still time.
His eyes locked with mine. Papa, he said, Jesus told me, this isn't just a warning. It's a calling. And at that moment, I knew what he saw on that calendar, what Jesus revealed month by month, wasn't meant to create fear. It was meant to wake us up. Matthew paused after sharing about the calendar. His eyes were focused, like he was seeing something beyond the walls of the hospital room. He spoke softly, but with a weight that made every word feel like it was pressing on my chest. Papa, he said, Jesus told me that all of this, all the floods, the food shortages, the fake miracles, they're just symptoms. I frowned. Symptoms of what? He looked at me and said something I'll never forget.
2025 will be the great sifting. Not everything that looks alive is truly mine.
Those words echoed inside me. Great sifting, I had read about it in church. Somewhere in Matthew chapter 13, the wheat and the tares, the sheep and the goats. but I never thought I'd live to see it happen. Matthew explained it like this: Jesus showed me two kinds of people during the shaking. Both groups looked the same on the outside. They went to church, they prayed, they even used his name. But when the pressure came, only one group stood firm. The other collapsed. He described the first group people who had been quietly building their lives on God's voice. People who didn't chase the spotlight. They didn't need fame, comfort, or applause. They had learned to hear Jesus in the ordinary. So when the extraordinary came, they didn't panic. They were calm, Papa Matthew said. Even when everything around them was falling apart, they had peace. Not because they were strong, but because they were connected. Then he described the second group. They looked prepared on the outside, he said. They had supplies, bunkers, emergency kits. But they were empty inside. When the chaos hit, they turned on each other. They blamed, argued, and made decisions from fear. And then he hesitated. What, anak? I asked gently. Then he whispered, Jesus called it spiritual death.
They kept their bodies alive but lost their souls.
That hit me like a punch to the chest. I had always thought survival meant food, water, safety. But now, I was seeing there was something worse than dying. Living without Jesus. Matthew said Jesus told him that this sifting wouldn't be about denominations, wealth, or even knowledge. It would be about relationship. Who truly walks with him and who just uses his name. He continued, Jesus said, the church is full of people who think they know him, but they've never heard his voice. They believe in him, but they don't belong to him. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Because, if I was honest, that was me. I went through the motions, prayers before meals, Sunday services, giving offerings. But I couldn't remember the last time I sat quietly asking Jesus what he wanted, or even if he was pleased with me. Many will fall away, Matthew said quietly, not because they hate God, but because they never truly knew him.
When the world shakes, only those rooted in me will stand. Not rooted in church, not rooted in religion, rooted in me.
He told me stories of pastors who would begin to compromise truth for comfort, worship leaders who would perform for fame, churches that would grow in size but shrink in spirit. And in contrast, small groups of believers in living rooms, in hills, in poor barangays, gathering with sincerity, worshiping with tears, obeying without question. I began to see the sifting for what it was: not punishment, but purification, a chance to strip away everything fake and find what's real. Matthew leaned in and said, Papa, Jesus told me this is already beginning in the Philippines. I froze. Here, yes, he said. He said our country will be a mirror. Some churches will burn with fire from heaven. Others will rot from within. He said the Filipino people are deeply spiritual, but many are distracted, busy, numb, addicted to comfort, politics, false hope. And if they don't wake up, they will be swept away when the shaking begins. Tears streamed down Liza's face. Jesus said, he loves the Philippines, Matthew added. He said, we're part of his plan. That revival will rise here, but only after the sifting.
The fire I send is not to destroy, but to reveal. Let what is fake burn, so that what is pure can shine.
I looked at my son, amazed at what he was saying. It was like hearing prophecy through the voice of a child. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't from him. This was Jesus. I thought about our church, the routines, the performances, the politics, and I asked myself a terrifying question. If the sifting began today, would I be found faithful? Would I recognize his voice in the chaos? Would I still worship if everything was taken away? Matthew looked at me as if he heard my thoughts. Jesus said this sifting isn't meant to scare us. It's to save us. He's giving us time. He's giving us grace. But that window is closing. I nodded slowly. The weight of it all sat heavy in my chest. And in that moment, I knew I had to change. Not my religion, my heart. Because the shaking wasn't just coming, it had already begun. After Matthew told us about the great sifting, there was a long silence in the hospital room. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full, heavy, holy. Liza reached for his hand. Anak, she said softly, if everything Jesus showed you is coming, what are we supposed to do? How can we be ready? Matthew didn't hesitate. He pulled out a small folded notebook from under his hospital pillow. The pages were wrinkled, written in pencil, some lines shaky as if his hands were trembling while writing. Jesus told me to write this down, he said. Step by step, I leaned forward. My heart was beating faster. This was it. Not just a warning, but a map. Matthew turned the page and began reading. First, he said, Jesus said to begin every day with one question. He looked at me and Liza and repeated it slowly.
Ask me, Lord, what do you want me to focus on today? Not what you think matters, but what I know is eternal.
I blinked. That's it. Just one question. Matthew nodded. It's simple, Papa, but it changes everything. Most people wake up thinking about bills, traffic errands, plans. But Jesus said, when we start the day with His direction, we'll walk in divine alignment. He'll lead us to the right people, the right choices, and away from traps. I looked down. I couldn't remember the last time I'd asked God that question. I always asked Him to bless my plans, but never to give me His. Second, Matthew continued. Jesus said to practice hearing His voice in safe situations. What does that mean? Liza asked. It means don't wait for a crisis to try hearing Him. Start with little things. When you're choosing what to eat, what route to take, whether to speak or stay silent, ask Him. Listen. Learn how His voice sounds in peace, so you can recognize it in chaos. Then He looked at both of us and said gently,
If you can't hear me in the small things, you won't hear me when everything is loud.
I felt convicted. I'd trusted instinct training, even gut feeling in my job. But I hadn't trained my spirit to listen to God. And when disaster strikes, instinct won't be enough. Third, Matthew said, flipping to the next page, find people who are also learning to listen. Like a prayer group, I asked. He shook his head. Not just that. Jesus said, don't look for the loudest Christians. Look for the most obedient ones. The ones who don't just talk about faith, but live it sacrificially, humbly, quietly. He looked down at his notes again.
Survival in the coming days will not be for the strongest, but for the connected. I move through community, not isolation.
I suddenly remembered how many times I'd tried to face life alone. Even spiritually, I'd thought being strong meant being independent. But Matthew's words reminded me, even Jesus walked with others. Fourth, Matthew said Jesus told me to practice generosity now. While we still have plenty, I raised an eyebrow. Now, even with inflation, yes, Papa, he said. He said the ones who give sacrificially before the shaking will receive supernaturally during it.
Give while it still costs something. What you release in faith, I multiply in mercy.
Liza and I exchanged glances. We had always tithed, donated to causes, but sacrificial giving in ways that made us uncomfortable, that was a different level. That required real trust. Matthew flipped to the final page. Fifth, he said slowly. Jesus told me, get rid of anything that drowns out his voice. I felt that one like a direct hit. What kind of things, I asked already, knowing the answer. Matthew shrugged. Not always sinful things. Sometimes just distractions. The endless scrolling, the constant noise, the shows that numb your heart. Even good things if they replace time with him. Then he looked at us with eyes too deep for a boy his age and said,
The enemy doesn't need to make you evil, only distracted. Clean your altar. Make room for my whisper.
I sat there, unable to speak. Every word hit a part of me I'd ignored. I thought I was a good man, a religious man, but I wasn't a listening man. Not until now. Matthew put the notebook down. That's what he said. That's how we survived 2025. He looked at me, then at his mom, not with more supplies, not with fear, but with intimacy, obedience, and trust. Liza wiped her tears. Anak, this changes everything. He nodded slowly. It has to, Mom, or we won't make it. Not just physically, but spiritually. And just like that, the room didn't feel like a hospital anymore. It felt like holy ground. Because survival wasn't about staying alive. It was about staying faithful. That night after the hospital lights dimmed and the machines settled into their quiet rhythm, Matthew asked if we could sit alone with him, no nurses, no visitors, just our family. Liza turned off her phone. I pulled the chair close to his bed. There was something different in the air. Not heavy like before, but holy, expectant. Papa, there's one more thing. Jesus showed me, Matthew said, his voice softer now, almost trembling. He said, what's coming in 2025 isn't set in stone. There are two possible futures, two timelines. I blinked. Two timelines. You mean like two versions of the year? He nodded. Yes. One path leads to destruction, the other to mercy. I leaned in closer. Tell me everything. He took a breath, eyes locked on mine. Jesus told me that what he showed me, the disasters, the deception, the collapse, those things are real. They've already started in the spiritual realm. But he paused, gripping the bed sheet.
If my people listen, repent, and return to me, I will hold back what the enemy has planned.
My heart skipped. So, this isn't unavoidable. No, Papa, he said. Jesus said we're living in a window of mercy, a short one. He compared it to the story of Jonah. Remember, I nodded slowly. God sent Jonah to warn Nineveh. 40 days and the city would fall. But when the people repented, God had mercy. Matthew smiled gently. Jesus said, this is just like that. The warnings aren't meant to create panic. They're invitations to choose a better future. Liza was crying now. Quiet tears of relief and conviction. She whispered, so how do we shift the timeline? Matthew didn't hesitate. Jesus said, it's not about politics. It's not about electing the right leaders or fixing the economy. It starts in homes. in hearts.
If enough hearts turn, I will turn the tide.
He told us that there are two histories being written right now. The first is the history of man led by pride, greed, comfort, and control. That one leads to the shaking we've heard about. But the second is the history heaven longs to release, one of revival, restoration, families healed, churches awakened, youth on fire for God. But Matthew said slowly, most people will ignore the warnings. Or worse, they'll hear them but respond with fear instead of repentance. They'll stockpile food, move to the mountains, build walls, but never build altars. His words pierced me. I thought of how quickly my own mind had gone to practical steps, what to buy, where to go. But now I saw clearly none of that would change the timeline. Only surrender would.
I am not looking for perfect people, only surrendered ones. I can do more with repentance than with preparation.
Matthew said Jesus showed him pictures of families kneeling together, children laying hands on their parents, entire neighborhoods gathering to pray not because a church told them to, but because their hearts were burning. He said Jesus smiled when he showed him those moments. He said those were turning points, Matthew whispered. Places where the timeline shifted. I closed my eyes. I could see it, a different future, not without hardship, but full of grace. A Philippines not just known for religion, but for revival, for righteousness, for young people leading prayer instead of protests, for families restoring altars in their homes. But then Matthew's tone changed. Jesus also showed me what happens if people ignore this chance. I opened my eyes. He said the disasters would come faster, more intense. The deception would harden hearts, and churches that once carried his glory would become cold, political, and powerless. He looked down. He was weeping when he showed me that part.
I do not delight in judgment, but I cannot protect what refuses to listen.
Silence filled the room. And then Matthew looked at us, eyes burning with urgency. Papa, Mom, we have to choose. Every day, every moment. Which timeline are we feeding? Which one are we walking into? I took his hand in mine. Liza rested her head on his shoulder. And I knew right there in that hospital room, we had already started choosing. Not with a shout, but with a whisper of repentance. Because heaven isn't waiting for perfect plans. It's waiting for willing hearts. The next morning, as golden sunlight poured through the hospital window, I found Matthew already awake, sitting up straight, eyes alert, notebook in hand again. There was a seriousness on his face different from the day before, like something else had been placed on his shoulders during the night. Papa, he said without any small talk, Jesus gave me one more assignment. It's not just for you or for our family. It's for my generation. He flipped to the last few pages of his notebook. He called us the last generation of watchmen. I leaned in. Watchmen like in the Bible. Matthew nodded. Yes, like Ezekiel, like Joel, like the ones who see danger from far away and warn the people before it's too late. Jesus said he's speaking to thousands of kids and teenagers all over the world right now. Through dreams, through visions, through his voice. Liza sat at the foot of the bed, brushing his hair gently. But why children? Matthew's answer came quickly. Because adults don't listen. He looked down at the notebook, then back at us.
The older generation has become too busy, too proud, too numb, but the young still dare to believe in the impossible.
His words made me uncomfortable, but deep down, I knew they were true. How many times had I explained away spiritual things, dreams as stress, convictions as overthinking, passion as emotionalism? I had spent years trusting logic over the spirit, and now Jesus was bypassing men like me to raise up sons like him. Matthew continued. Jesus said, "We've entered a season where children will speak with authority, and those who have ears will know it's him, but many won't listen. They'll mock us. They'll say we're just emotional, dramatic, delusional."
They mocked the prophets before. They will mock you too, but speak anyway.
Matthew's hands were trembling now, not with fear, but fire. His whole being was wrapped in urgency. He said, "I'm not the only one," he said. "Jesus is raising up a generation who will carry both warning and hope. We'll preach, not from pulpits, but from phones, classrooms, sidewalks, even in jeepneys. Some of us will use art, music, stories. Some will fast and pray in secret. Others will speak before crowds, but all of us will carry fire." He paused, then whispered something that made chills run down my spine. He said, "The older generation must choose, either cover us or try to silence us." Liza gasped. I looked at Matthew, unsure what to say.
Let the children prophesy. Let the youth cry out. I have anointed them for such a time as this.
For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Matthew said something I'll never forget. Jesus said this shaking won't be stopped by politicians or bishops. It will be met by revival from below, not the stage, but the streets. From hungry hearts, not famous names. He told us about visions he had of Filipino teens praying at school during lunch, of students laying hands on sick classmates, of youth gatherings that didn't wait for permission from adults, but began with broken hearts, crying out for God. Some of the biggest moves of God in 2025, Matthew said, won't happen inside churches, but in skate parks, basketball courts, flood evacuation centers, barangay halls.
My spirit will fall wherever I am wanted. I do not need a building. I need hunger.
And then came the warning. He said not all churches will support us. Some will call us too young, too reckless. Some will even oppose us. But that's why he's calling families, especially parents, to cover us, to believe in us, to protect the fire instead of extinguishing it. Liza was weeping by now. Jesus said, Matthew continued that many parents will miss the move of God because they're trying to control it instead of recognizing it.
If you honor the voice of the young, you will hear my voice through them.
I was undone. As a father, I had spent years trying to lead Matthew, guide him, shape him. But now God was asking me to follow the voice he had placed inside my son. He wasn't just our child anymore. He was a watchman, a forerunner, a messenger of mercy in a generation on the edge of judgment. Papa Matthew said softly, "We don't have time for long debates. The warnings are clear. The time is short." Jesus told me, either we rise now or we fall together. And with that, I knew what our role had to be. Not to control this generation, but to champion it. Not to criticize, but to cover. Because Jesus isn't waiting for a microphone or a mega church. He's waiting for a teenager with a broken heart and an open mouth. And in the Philippines, they're already rising. That evening, just before we were discharged from the hospital, Matthew asked us to step outside with him for a few minutes. He had insisted on walking, even if just slowly, around the small rooftop garden area above the sixth floor. The nurses warned him not to exert too much, but he simply said, Jesus said, I need to breathe the air before we go home. Something's shifting. So we went. The sun was setting over Quezon City, painting the Manila skyline in hues of gold and fire. Down below, horns were blaring. People were rushing, lights were flickering on one by one like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. We stood there quietly for a while. Liza held Matthew's arm. I kept glancing at his face, looking for signs of fatigue. But what I saw instead was something I couldn't explain. Peace. Unshakable supernatural peace. Papa, he said finally, we can't live the same anymore. I nodded. I know, anak. I feel it too. He turned toward us, and his next words were both beautiful and terrifying. Jesus said this was just the beginning, that everything we saw, everything he showed me, was preparation. The real journey begins now. I didn't speak. I knew he was right.
Do not prepare out of fear. Prepare out of faith. This is not the end, but the opening of the final chapter.
Matthew explained that Jesus didn't give us these revelations so we would run away and hide. He gave them so we could live differently, think differently, love differently. He said 2025 would be both the darkest and the brightest year this generation has seen, and that the difference between fear and fire would be one thing: intimacy.
Those who walk close to me will walk through fire and not be burned. Those who keep distance will not survive the heat.
He told us that miracles would increase, but so would manipulation, that signs and wonders would flood the earth, but not all would be from God. He said the only way to survive would not be to chase miracles, but to know his voice so well we could spot the fake in a second. He told us that the real church wouldn't be measured by buildings or live streams or attendance, but by hearts that listen and obey, homes that host his presence, families that surrender their plans, believers who choose righteousness when no one is watching. Jesus said, Matthew whispered that we must start practicing now, not waiting for the shaking to begin. Because when the storm hits, it will be too loud to learn how to listen. I swallowed hard. Then what do we do next? Matthew smiled gently.
Start with me. Start with a whisper. I do not ask for perfection, only a yes.
So that night, in the stillness of our small kitchen back home, the three of us held hands around our dinner table. No music, no fancy prayers, just three people choosing to say yes. We asked Jesus what he wanted from us. We asked where to begin, and he spoke, not with thunder, but with clarity. We cleaned out distractions from our home. We turned off the noise. We created space each day to listen. We taught ourselves to pray not with formulas, but with honesty. We began meeting with others quietly at first, sharing the message Matthew had received. Some believed, others laughed, but we kept going because Jesus said,
You are not responsible for who believes. You are responsible to speak.
So we spoke to neighbors, to co-workers, to classmates, to other parents, to church leaders, to tricycle drivers, to street vendors, to anyone with ears to hear, and something began to shift. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were becoming ready, not ready in the way the world defines it. Hoarding supplies, moving to safer places, building physical bunkers. but ready in the way heaven sees it. Humble hearts, open ears, unwavering obedience. Because now we understood 2025 will not be survived by the strong, but by the surrendered. And so, if you're reading this, if your heart is burning, if something inside you knows this isn't just a story, but a call, then hear me. This is your invitation.
I am calling my bride to wake up, clean her garments, and listen for my footsteps. The night is almost over, and the dawn is near.
You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to kneel. Start with surrender. Start with silence. Start with the simple question: Jesus, what do you want me to do today? And when He answers, say yes. Because one day soon, maybe in 2025, maybe sooner, the shaking will begin. And when it does, your ears will either recognize His whisper or be drowned by the storm. As for me and my house, we've chosen our timeline. We've chosen our fire. We've chosen our shepherd. And no matter what comes, we are ready.